Yeah, so sperm getting to the egg is not an easy feat. But once it gets there and an egg gets in, and what is the name of the enzymes that are released by the sperm in order to gain entry into the egg? Starts with an A. And it's in the end of the sperm. Anyone remember? Starts with an A. Acrosomal. Acrosomal. So those are the enzymes that make their way or make way for the sperm to fuse with the egg's membrane, the plasma membrane. And when that fusion occurs, there is two blocks to any more sperm getting into the egg. And those are a fast block and slow block that prevents polyspermy. So that prevents more than one egg from, or more than one sperm rather, from fertilizing the egg. But interestingly, in nature, occasionally there's non-disjunction of chromosomes, and some eggs end up strangely being diploid, and they may even fuse with a haploid gamete, producing a strange diploid individual. There's even octoploids. So strawberries are octoploids. They have 8 sets of chromosomes instead of the usual 2. So that does happen. But with humans, if there is non-disjunction of an extreme sort, it's not compatible with life, as it is not compatible with life for most life forms. Just sometimes polyploidy is induced by farmers that farm fish, for example, but also for crops. And that sometimes makes the crops more hardy for the fish. And often with hatcheries, for example, polyploidy will be induced, but that will make the fish infertile. So they won't be able to mate. Yeah, so for today, we'll talk a little bit about that non-disjunction of chromosomes in humans that lead to some anomalies at birth. And last time we talked about the last stage of our series of stages of development. So we started with fertilization. We formed a structure. It starts with a Z. What is the name of that structure? You can type that in the chat. What is the name of a fertilized egg? Starts with a Z. The zygote. Excellent. Yes, the zygote. And the zygote starts to go through cleavage, becomes a morula eventually, and goes through blastulation, becomes a blastula, goes through gastrulation, becomes a gastrula, implants in the human, implants in the endometrial tissue of the uterus, and starts to grow its roots. The placenta starts to form, and the later stages of development are neurogenesis. So that's the development of the nervous system, and organogenesis. So that's the development of organs and organ systems from the primary germ layers, which we discussed last time, which include, of course, ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. Organogenesis. So we're going to watch a film about development. So you'll see some of these stages occur. So while you're watching it, see if you can't pick out some of these stages. So at 37 days, for example, the embryo is teeny tiny, but is developing an eye, a forebrain here. So these are the dilations. There's the forebrain, a nasal pit already, a tail, a foot plate, a hand plate. So these are just beginning the buds of the limbs. And the determination this is kind of another topic. We're not really covering it in this course, but the determination of where the limbs will be, or where the head end or the tail end of the embryo will be, is determined by, well, we did discuss a little bit, didn't we? It's determined by various things, signals from surrounding cells or from chemicals. And then during development, there's also a very important physiology, and that is that it's called apoptosis, which is called programmed cell death. So there are structures such as the tail, which will form early on, and pharyngeal slits also form early on. And those are structures that identify us as chordates, basically. But they're only found in the embryo. They're not found in the adult. Other chordates, however, do have those structures in the adult form. At 49 days, there are some webbed fingers. Occasionally, there will be births with webbed fingers, and that's where apoptosis has not occurred. Apoptosis is programmed cell death, so that webbing will disappear with that, but very occasionally it does not. 56 days, the toes are separated. Eyes are there, but closed. Yeah, so a few stages of development. What occurs with circulation? Well, at first, the fetus is getting nutrients and oxygen from the mother, but organs are present. There's some anatomical changes, however, in circulation. So the endothelium merges into blood vessels and lymphatic vessels. So that's the endothelial tissue that merges and makes essentially tubes. And these tubes are the blood vessels and lymphatic vessels. And the endothelial tubes will fuse to form the heart. And the heart, as you will see, occurs very quickly. Yes, there are cases where the tail does not disappear before birth. There have been cases of births with a tail, which is surgically removed. Fetal circulation, the umbilical placental circuit is via the umbilical cord. So blood circulation before birth is through the placenta and the fetus's circulatory system. And in the newborn, the circulation is independent. So this is an approximate size differentiation from week 9 through week 38. You'll see this in the film. There's a transitional period once the baby is born, known as a neonate or a newborn. The transitional period's first 6 to 8 hours, the heart and respiratory rate increase, body temperature falls. There is periods of sleeping and of some gagging to get rid of mucus and debris. The respiratory adaptations are such that the onset of breathing, of course, which hasn't been necessary before because oxygen was supplied through the blood and from the mother, but now the baby has to breathe on their own, and the trigger for breathing is carbon dioxide accumulation. So if no new oxygen is inhaled, then carbon dioxide builds up. The carbon dioxide mixes with water and makes the blood acidic. And that is a trigger for breathing. It's an effort to inflate the lungs for the first few breaths. Immunological adaptation. So immunity, of course, very important in a newborn. At first, the antibody diffuses across the placenta. And that provides a good approximately 6 months of protection from infections while the fetal production is increasing. And the immunity, the proteins are also in breast milk, and that can protect the newborn from gastroenteritis. That's inflammation. Of course, the digestive system is also brand new and is just starting to be used. So it's a big deal. Circulatory adaptations. The umbilical arteries become ligamentous. And yeah, they become ligamentous. That's really all I know. Thermoregulation and fluid balance. An infant has a larger ratio of surface area to volume. So anything that's small has a large surface area relative to volume, and heat is lost through the surface area. And so an infant loses heat more easily, but there are defenses. So there is an abundance of what's called brown fat, and that's deposited during week 17 to 20 in fetal life. And then the mitochondria break down pyruvic acid and release only heat. So the brown fat grows, metabolic rate increases, and it accumulates subcutaneous fat as well. So yeah, brown fat is it remains in the adult to a small part in your bottom cheeks, and in your cheeks there's a little bit of brown fat. But metabolism increases heat because metabolism, if you recall from chemistry, is all of the chemical reactions of the body. And that includes muscle contractions and all the other enzymic reactions. And the byproduct of all of those chemical reactions is heat. So the metabolic rate increases to release heat. The kidneys are not fully developed at birth. There's a high rate of water loss, which requires more fluid intake relative to body weight. Premature infants are those weighing under 5.5 pounds. If an infant is born before 7 months, there can be respiratory distress because there isn't enough surfactant, and that causes alveolar collapse with exhalation. So that means that the alveoli are not, they're not maintaining their integral structure for breathing and for exchanging gases across their surface. The hypothalamus is also underdeveloped at that stage, and the hypothalamus regulates thermal control. The digestive system also would not be well developed. Usually as the infant is fed a low-fat formula instead of breast milk. And a liver, which is also still in this, these are all structures that are in the later stages of development that have not fully developed. The liver doesn't synthesize plasma proteins, which can lead to deficiency in clotting and jaundice from bile. Congenital anomalies. These are anomalies that occur at birth, such as infectious diseases. So infectious diseases, some microorganisms can cross the placenta, and they include a herpes simplex, a rubella, cytomegalovirus, and HIV. So that can result in different kinds of effects. Could be as severe as blindness, cerebral palsy, physical and mental retardation. Those are some of the results. Teratogens are viruses, chemicals, or other agents that cause anatomical deformities in the fetus. So one of them is thalidomide. That was administered to women Unfortunately, I believe it was because of morning sickness. Um, but thalidomide has two isomers. So it has one form and another form. And if you recall in chemistry, a lot of chemicals do. And one is functional in the way it's supposed to be, but the other isomer, which the effect of it was unknown, caused anatomical deformities, unformed arms or legs. Fetal alcohol syndrome, smoking and x-rays can also cause defects, cardiac, central nervous system defects, and anencephaly, so a lack of growth of the brain tissue, a cleft lip and palate, hyperactivity, and poor attention span. So effect of thalidomide, that was a very tragic time. A mutagen is an agent that alters DNA or chromosome structure. It can be something like radiation, usually quite severe radiation. Some chemicals like nitrites can be mutagens. A mutagen can alter DNA, and if that DNA happens to be in the gonads, in the ovaries or the testes, then that can be passed on to the offspring. So many genetic disorders are failure of the homologous chromosomes to separate during meiosis. Normal separation is disjunction. So when they don't separate, that's called non-disjunction. So instead of one homologous chromosome going over to this cell, daughter cell, the other homologous chromosome going over to this homologous cell, they do not. Two of them go to one cell, and the other cell doesn't receive either. And that's called non-disjunction, an unequal number of chromosomes. So aneuploidy is the wrong number of chromosomes. It could be 0 instead of 1. It could be 2 instead of 1. It can be detected prior to birth with amniocentesis. That's examining fetal cells from amniotic fluid, or chorionic villus sampling, examining placental cells. So this is normal disjunction, for example, of the X chromosomes. So here's the parent cell, the female, 2 X chromosomes. A disjunction during meiosis would result in the daughter cells receiving an X chromosome. Then, when there's fertilization, might occur as 2 X chromosomes or as an X and Y zygote. However, non-disjunction occurs when the parent cell is here. One daughter cell gets both X chromosomes, and the other daughter cell gets no X chromosome. Therefore, when the sperm adds an X chromosome, in here you have a triplo X cell zygote. If there is no chromosome in the egg, but the sperm provides an X chromosome, then there is an exozygote, and that results in what is known as Turner syndrome. Turner syndrome. So triplo X is triple X, an egg receiving 2 X chromosomes fertilized by an X carrying sperm. That can result in an infertile female with mild intellectual impairment. Klinefelter syndrome is an XXY individual, so the Y is from the sperm. These result in sterile males with average intelligence but undeveloped testes. Turner syndrome, where there are no X chromosomes, but the egg receives no X, it's fertilized by the X-carrying sperm. That results in a sterile individual. The neck can be somewhat webbed. A female with no secondary sexual characteristics or features. So those are the non-disjunction of sex chromosomes. There also may be non-disjunction of autosomes, which is often lethal. So that could result in a miscarriage The most survivable type is Down syndrome, which is trisomy 21. So this is chromosome 21. So there's been non-disjunction of an autosome during meiosis. That can result in some recognizable features of Down syndrome: shorter stature, flattened facial features, epicanthal folds on the eyes here, enlarged tongue, shorter fingers, and mental retardation. It occurs in proportion to the age of the mother. So approximately 1 in 9 for a 48-year-old mother, 1 in 3,000 for under 30-year-old mother. Aging. Why aging occurs is a big question, but I think the most prevalent idea is that cells can only divide so many times. So, of course, the zygote is totipotent, so it divides for the rest of its life, but it's unrecognizable, of course, as the original cell. Probably the original cell does not exist. However, some stem cells go through division for the entire life of the individual, and every time a cell goes through division, it requires replication of DNA. And DNA can only be replicated in one direction, from the 3' to the 5' end of the DNA molecule. And so what that means is that on one end, there is nowhere for a nucleotide to be added. And so one end of the chromosomes tends to erode. And it's okay for a number of years because there are telomeres, or ends of the chromosomes, that don't code for anything anyway. But after a while, some of the coding part of the chromosome could erode. So aging is the changes that occur with the passage of time: growth, development, and degeneration. Senescence is the degeneration that occurs after the age of peak functional efficiency. The leading cause of death from ages 18 to 34 is accidents, homicides, suicides, and AIDS. The leading cause of death after 55 is senescence related to diseases like cancer, stroke, diabetes, heart, and lung disease. The organ systems do not degenerate at the same rate, and some changes are not evident except under stress or some kind of trauma or injury. So the aging of the integumentary system becomes noticeable in about the late 40s. There's intrinsic aging of the skin. The hair becomes gray, the hair thins, the skin becomes thinner and looser, and that's largely due to a lack of collagen. Skin bruises more easily and heals more slowly. There's a greater probability of hypothermia in cold weather and heat stroke in hot weather. There's atrophy of the cutaneous vessels and sweat glands. And the cutaneous vessels are those that allow for cooling, as well as sweat glands. And a decrease or atrophy of subcutaneous fat, which is, of course, helping to regulate the temperature of an individual. And there's a decrease in vitamin D production and a decrease in calcium, not a decrease, an increase in calcium deficiency. So it's particularly important, of course, at the moment for individuals at my age or older to be taking vitamin D, because not only is it instrumental in some other functions of the body, but importantly in immunity. So it's important to be taking vitamin D and to check, of course, whether or not a vitamin D is deficient. Photoaging is degeneration in proportion to UV exposure. That results in things like skin spots, skin cancer, and wrinkling. So if you've played volleyball outdoors as much as I have, then you will get some aging. I have aging happening with my skin, especially with my neck. Nothing you can do about that, I guess. Okay. Aging of the skeletal system. Osteopenia is the loss of bone mass. So after age 30, osteoblasts, those are the cells that make bone, are less active than osteoclasts. Those are the cells that degenerate bone in order that remodeling can occur. So after 40, women tend to lose about 8% per decade and men 3%. Brittle bones can fracture more easily and heal slowly due to a decline in protein synthesis. So it's extremely important for individuals to remain active because activity increases the efficacy of the bone cells to instead of degenerate bone, to build bone. So even though there are maybe less active osteoblasts, you can make them more active if you do exercise, particularly weight-bearing exercise. Joint diseases occur because synovial fluid, which is the fluid between joints, is less abundant, and the cartilage between joints that keeps the bones from rubbing together is thinner or absent, and friction may cause pain. Osteoarthritis is a common cause of physical disability. Breathing can also get difficult due to calcification of sternocostal joints. Those sternocostal joints are the joints between the sternum and the ribs. But herniated discs are less common because there is less nucleus pulposus, and that is the gel-like substance that is in the intervertebral joints. Muscular atrophy causes a replacement of lean body mass with fat. By 80, we have about half as much strength and endurance. And of course, that also depends largely on how much exercise an individual does. Fast twitch fibers, so we have fast twitch and slow twitch fibers exhibit atrophy. So the fast twitch fibers are the ones that are used for example, sprinting, and slow twitch fibers for walking, for example. Reasons for loss of strength: the fibers have fewer myofibrils. Those are the fibers that contract. Smaller mitochondria, those are the organelles that provide energy. Fewer enzymes, less glycogen, and myoglobin. So glycogen is the storage of glucose, and myoglobin is the storage of oxygen. There are fewer motor neurons in the spinal cord with less efficient synaptic transmission of acetylcholine. And the sympathetic nervous system is less efficient, so there's less efficient blood flow to muscles, which causes fatigue. Yeah, the nervous system isn't out of the woods either with aging. There's cerebral and neuronal atrophy. From age 35, brain cells tend to die, and they aren't replaced. Brain cells are not replaced. However, even with less or fewer brain cells, one can always increase synapses between the brain cells that are there. So that doesn't mean that it's all over. That just means that you have to work hard and have an enriched environment in order to keep neurons making synapses, because dendrites can always be made and grown. The brain weighs less by age 75, about 50% less. The cortex is thinner, the gyri narrower, there are fewer synapses and neuroglia, less neurotransmitter and receptors, degeneration of myelin also, which slows down signal transduction, or conduction rather. Neurons contain less endoplasmic reticulum and Golgi because metabolism slows down. They accumulate more lipofuscin pigment that occurs with the with the digestion of organelles, there can be neurofibrillary tangles and protein plaques that accumulate during this time. And those are two things that contribute to Alzheimer's. Motor coordination, intellectual function, short-term memory suffer from the degeneration of the nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is less efficient at regulating body temperature and blood pressure. And other sense organs can also be influenced by aging or vision. The lenses are less flexible. That leads to presbyopia. So that's why an individual cannot see close up aging eye. Cataracts also form. That's a cloudiness of the lenses. So, but cataract surgery is very common now, and it's quite amazing. I've had it myself. I had early onset, apparently, cataracts. Again, probably due to playing volleyball in the sun for 10 years. Apparently, UV radiation can affect the onset of cataracts. But cataract surgery is very advanced now. Night vision can be impaired due to fewer receptors. The vitreous body is less transparent. Pupil dilators atrophy. And enzymic reactions become slower. Glaucoma risks increase with other structural changes. Hearing can also be affected by aging. The tympanic membrane and ossicle joints stiffen. Hair cells and auditory nerve fibers die. There's a death of receptor cells in the semicircular duct cells that result in poor balance and dizziness. And taste and smell can also be blunted as receptors decline in number. The endocrine system is affected as well. It degenerates less than other systems, however. Only the reproductive, growth, and thyroid hormones decline steadily after adolescence, but other hormones are secreted at a fairly stable rate. Although target cell sensitivity may decline. The pituitary gland is less sensitive to negative feedback inhibition, and response to stress is prolonged. Type 2 diabetes is more common. There's more body fat due to a decrease in insulin sensitivity of other cells. So target cells have fewer insulin receptors. Anemia or lack of circulation results from nutrition, lack of exercise, changes in erythropoiesis, that's the production of red blood cells, lack of intrinsic factor will decrease vitamin B12 absorption. So vitamin B12 is something very important to be monitored, because that can lead to anemia. Atherosclerosis, that is building up of plaque in the coronary arteries, leads to angina, infarction, arrhythmia, and heart block, quite possibly. The heart walls may become thinner, stroke volume and output declines. There's a degeneration of nodes and conduction system. So those regulate the heart. Atherosclerosis of other vessels can increase blood pressure because the blood vessels get smaller, narrower due to the increase of plaque on the sides. They stiffen, they cannot expand as effectively. And varicose veins occur due to weaker valves. So the one-way valves of the veins that allow for blood to be shunted back to the heart from the body may get weak, and therefore blood pools in capillaries. The immune system can also be affected. Lymphatic tissue and red bone marrow declines. There's few hematopoietic stem cells that are dividing to produce daughter blood cells, and disease-fighting leukocytes, so white blood cells, and antigen-presenting cells. So those are all part of the immune system. Lymphocytes fail to mature, your white blood cells. both types of immune responses are less efficient. So there's less protection from things such as cancer and infectious disease. And the respiratory system will also decline somewhat. Ventilation may be less because the costal cartilage, so that's the cartilage between the ribs, is less flexible, and there's less elastic tissue and fewer alveoli. It's more difficult to clear the lungs of irritants and pathogens. So that makes the respiratory system more susceptible to infection at an older age. And that's why, I mean, deaths from COVID, of course, have been tragically high. And a lot of the deaths will be due to secondary infections. Chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases like emphysema and chronic bronchitis can become more prominent. The hypoxemia and hypoxic degeneration of other organ systems, that's due to the lack of oxygen and the lack of blood supply. The urinary system will also suffer from aging. Atrophy means becoming smaller, essentially, so losing mass. It can be 40% smaller by age 90. So that's loss of the nephrons, loss of the glomeruli. A filtration rate can decrease, so we cannot clear drugs as rapidly at an advanced age. The body is less responsive to ADH, or the antidiuretic hormone, and the sense of thirst is reduced, so dehydration is common. Voiding and bladder control, in 80% of men with benign prostatic hyperplasia, urine retention is aggravated failure of the nephrons. And female incontinence is due to weakened sphincters. So Kegel exercises are important for females. And the digestive system can also reduce in function. Dental health is affected by reduced saliva. Saliva is very important for health of teeth. So you're more prone to cavities and also swallowing difficulties. The gastric mucosa atrophies as well and secretes less acid and intrinsic factor. So that can reduce the absorption of some vitamins and minerals. Sphincters weaken. So the sphincter between the stomach and the intestines, the stomach and the esophagus, can cause esophageal reflux and heartburn. Motility is decreased because there's less muscle tone, less fiber, less water, and less exercise. And reduced food intake is due to loss of appetite and mobility risks, malnutrition. The reproductive system ages in both the male and the female due to loss of hormones. So there's less testosterone secretion in males, so the sperm count and libido decline. An individual can be fertile in old age, but impotence may occur. That's due to atherosclerosis or hypertension or medication. So that is erectile dysfunction, is impotence. But fertility can remain quite high. It's quite interesting. Charlie Chaplin, I think he had a child at 73. Yeah. Females have more rapid and abrupt changes. So the ovarian follicles, because there is only 400,000 or so at puberty, then they tend to just have been used up on a monthly basis. Gametogenesis ceases. The ovarian cease to produce the sex steroids. The results of that can be vaginal dryness and atrophy and reduced libido. There's an elevated risk of osteoporosis and atherosclerosis. So why should you exercise? This is really important. Good nutrition, always, of course, not only in old age. But good nutrition and exercise, super important. The best ways to slow aging. Exercise improves quality of life enormously. It provides endurance, strength, joint mobility. A 90-year-old can increase muscle strength threefold in 6 months with only 40 minutes of isometric exercise per week. Yeah, I don't know if you've ever seen these videos. I get sent dance videos by people quite often. That's another extracurricular activity that I do. I have a great dance group of about 7 people, and before COVID, of course, we were going out and we'd go out dancing about maybe twice a week, 2 or 3 times a week anyway. And there's one place we went, the Fairview. There was a gentleman there, his name was John Hay. And we celebrated his 100th birthday at the Fairview. And he was still dancing. And he danced, 2 or 3 times a week. He's a great dancer. He danced with all the ladies. And yeah, he was in good shape. So resistance exercise reduces bone fractures. So that's using things like bands and weights. Endurance exercise, like long walks, for example, reduce body fat, increase cardiac output and oxygen uptake. 3 to 5, 20 to 6-minute periods of exercise where the heart rate is raised to 60 to 90% of maximum. Yeah, so 3 to 5, 20 to 6 minutes per week. Yeah, so the theories of senescence, there's a limit to the number of times cells can replicate. The polymerase that replicates DNA, the terminal genes of DNA in older chromosomes due to the shortness of the telomeres, it gets shorter and shorter. Those are non-coding nucleotides, but they tend to get shorter and shorter over time. Collagen molecules become cross-linked, so they're less soluble and stiffer. Proteins become abnormal due to improper folding. So in the process of making proteins, they don't become the shape that they're supposed to be for their function. Free radicals may accumulate and damage macromolecules. That's due to lack of antioxidants. So antioxidants like dark green leafy vegetables and blueberries, of course, are important to maintain in a diet. And lymphocytes may mount an attack against one's own tissues. So that is an autoimmune kind of function. So aging can be accelerated. Progeria is a genetic disorder that results in accelerated aging. So why does senescence occur? Well, it was once thought that death occurred for the good of the species, to keep resources for the young and healthy. But of course, evolution doesn't occur as a result of any species kinds of purpose. Rather, natural selection works on an individual. So in order for genes to propagate into the next generation, an individual's is selected for fitness in order that those genes get into the next generation. And so that's natural selection. Yeah, that's all about individuals. So genes that don't affect reproductive rates will neither be favored nor eliminated. So genes that code for things like Alzheimer's, atherosclerosis, colon cancer, they affect the elderly. So natural selection doesn't have an effect on those genes because those individuals have already reproduced. And once individuals have already reproduced, then there's no selection for disease-causing mechanisms. Yeah. There is no there is no predetermined gene that dictates how old an individual will get. So that's not a genetically determined factor. However, there are genes that contribute to different things like musculature and metabolism. And of course, they can contribute to longevity. So life expectancy is the average length of life in a given population. An average boy can expect to live to be about 72, average girl to 79. Of course, that depends on where one lives in the world. The maximum attainable age, I think it's 122. I'm not sure, it might be older than that now. There's no definable instant of biological death. Some organs function for an hour or so after the heart stops. But brain death is the lack of cerebral activity. So death usually occurs as a failure of a particular organ, and then it's followed by a cascade of other organ failures. Yeah, so on that cheery note, I'll stop the lecture. Thank you for watching.